Welcome to the Leadership Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Jonno White. I'm the founder and principal consultant of Clarity. We are an Australian-based consultancy that works with leaders around the world, and our passion is to invest in people to become everything they're meant to be in order to fill the world with healthy organizations that people love to work for and customers line up to buy from. The goal of this podcast is to invest in you and your leadership. If you're just joining us for the first time, then feel free to check out consultclarity.org. That's our website, consultclarity.org. We have so many free resources on there, the most popular being our 7 Questions on Leadership series. We've had more than 1,500 leaders from around the world in all different sectors give their in-depth answers on leadership, what books they love, what they found most challenging, the most meaningful stories, how they structure their time through the day. That's free, so go and check it out. And we'd love to interview you about your leadership. I believe you have advice from your experience, your context, and your life so far that is important and can help other leaders. It's also a great way to give back. It's free to get involved, and you can do so by going to consultclarity.org/7-questions-interest, or just Google consultclarity.org 7 questions interest and fill out the form that pops up. We have a free resource for you on our website. It's called Leadership Survival Guide. It's a 57-page ebook. It has interviews with 10 world-class leaders, and you can go to consultclarity.org. It's right at the top, and get that today. We also have a daily email that we send out to over 15,000 leaders, and that email contains the highlights, our best content from our podcasts, our blog, my book, the books that we're loving that are out there about leadership. It's also the best way to get access to our masterclasses and workshops before anyone else. And there's also exclusive and limited special options just for subscribers. And you can subscribe by going to consultclarity.org/subscribe. Now, my gift to you is to work incredibly hard to provide the best leadership content I can to invest in you and your leadership. So if you're finding our content helpful, if you find this podcast helpful, then your gift to me could be this. If you do find it helpful, then write a review or rate our content and make sure you subscribe or follow. I can't emphasize enough how helpful that is. It really does help us to get the word out there so we can invest in more leaders to become everything they're meant to be. It also means a lot to me personally when people like you and people in our community share our content on social media. So if you do that, then please do look for me, Jonno White, to tag me, and look to tag Clarity on whatever platform you're on. And our team, including me, I'm always looking to see when people have mentioned us so that I can engage with you. And also we look at sharing content. So if you write something about something we've done, there's also a good chance we'll share that with our followers. So if you could do that, that is a massive, massive help as we try to invest in as many leaders as we can around the world. Last of all, you can check out my book about how to deal with difficult people even if you hate conflict. It's called Step Up or Step Out. It's available on Amazon. You can just look up Step Up or Step Out Jonno White, or you can go to store.consultclarity.org/book and check it out there. I have coached leader after leader after leader, and in more than 50% of the sessions, this topic comes up. How do I deal with this person? I'm finding it really difficult, and I just want to find a way that doesn't blow up to just to have a difficult conversation, to lead them better. How do I do that? There's a 3-step process that I outline in this book that I believe can help you. Okay, let's get into today's episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast. Enjoy. Welcome to another episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast. Today's guest is Commissioner Bill Holen. Bill is the County Commissioner for Arapahoe County. Welcome to the podcast, Bill.
Well, thank you very much, Jonno. I'm honored to be asked to participate in your project.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to chatting with you, Bill. It's already been great just having a quick chat before we clicked record. First of all, can you just tell us a little bit about what you do?
Well, a county commissioner, we have 5 members in our county, and the number of county commissioners are reflective of the size of our county. We represent currently about 650,000 residents within Arapahoe County. Our responsibility includes um, uh, essentially running our public welfare program, which is funded through both federal, state, and our local funding to help individuals who are struggling with specific lifestyle problems, whether it's drug addiction or um, uh, unemployment or in mental health and medical issues. We help them get them and their families back on the feet. We're facing in the county a significant problem with homelessness, but that breaks both in terms of individual people, like you see in many of the cities across the country, with the exception of Japan, which I recently visited, to whole families that are basically living um, not necessarily on the street, but without a home, without a permanent shelter. And we help them through our nutritional programs, through our medical programs, and job development programs for the family to help them
Mm,
get back on their feet and become productive members of our society. In addition, we are responsible for. We have our own county airport, which I serve on. I'm a commercial pilot as well, and the airport is a huge economic generator for commercial, non-commercial, or general aviation travel, corporate travel. One of the third largest and busiest general aviation airports in the country. In
wow.
addition, we're responsible for the county roads infrastructure. There are over 6,000 counties in the United States, and
Mm,
a majority of those roads, or those transportation uh, ways, are run and maintained by counties. We
mm,
also fund, as I said earlier, human services and law enforcement. We are the funding agents for the constables or the local sheriff's department. So we play a broad role in both the economic development of developing economic development opportunities for the county, as well as participating in a variety of boards and commissions that we serve on, those agencies which we provide funding for in the nonprofit realm.
yeah, that's a wonderful summary. Thank you so much. That's helped me to understand more clearly from over here in Australia exactly what you do in across in a county in the US. So thank you for that. That's really helpful. Let's hear some of your story, Bill. I always love asking these sort of questions. I know our listeners enjoy hearing the stories behind leaders like you who are doing great things in your community. Let's start with your childhood. Growing up, what are some of the moments or even themes from that time of your life that really, as you look back, you can see that they shaped you into the person and the leader you are today?
Well, thank you. I grew up in northern Minnesota in a small town that was literally on the Canadian border called International Falls, Minnesota. Our closest city was Fort Francis, Ontario. So I got an early interest in foreign affairs because we had a lot of mutual uh, interesting issues by crossing the border into another country and absorbing the culture of that. I was very interested in aviation when I was a young boy. At the age of 16, I used to hang out at airports, and one day the airport manager came up to me and said, come on in. Let me show you the airport." So I got to sit in some airplanes and sat down, and he bought me a Coke, and he said, "Well, Bill, what do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I want to learn to be a pilot." And in the United States, you can start flying at age 16, but you can't get your pilot's license until you're 17. And I said, "Well, I don't have the money. I don't have a job." He said, "Well, listen, I'll tell you what I'll do, Bill. I will you come and work for me on the weekends and plow the runways and help wash planes and stuff. And for every hour that you work for me, I'll give you an hour of flying time. And by the time I turned 17, I had my pilot's license. So that encouraged me to be able to have a lot of self confidence and finding tasks and going after them in a creative and competitive manner. I was a member of the Boy Scouts, uh, where I worked, where I learned a lot of the skills. Like international Boy Scouting is very similar to what Australia does, and learning to be self sufficient, to help, to cook your own meals, to go out in the wintertime and set up a tent when it's 10 below zero and survive. It taught me a lot of interesting skills, as did learning to be a pilot. Um, I got involved with an organization called Civil Air Patrol, which had a cadet program, and I got involved in that because of my interest in aviation. And as a result, eventually took a leadership role where I became the cadet commander of the group, and ultimately received a national award for my leadership in that program. I was also involved in sports. Played baseball and hockey, which was the sport of northern Minnesota, and we would play. Interesting um, uh, anecdote is that we were the only hockey team in the United States that never started a game with the national anthem, because we played all our games in Fort Francis, Ontario, at their arena. So you can't, unless you were playing a Canadian team, you couldn't play the national anthem. So that was an interesting thing to learn.
Yeah.
One of my inspirations back then was, as a cadet, we had our uniforms, and when dignitaries came to town, we would escort them to the stage. And I had an opportunity to escort the former vice president, and at the time he was a senator, Hubert Humphrey, to the stage. And uh, we had a few minutes before I walked him to the stage, and he chatted, and he said, "Well, what are you doing, Bill?" And Humphrey was known for his affable uh, uh, attitude to his constituents, and loved to talk. And I told him I was on the debate team, and we were debating a certain issue, and he was interested. He said, "Well, listen, give me your address, and I'll have my staff send you some information on the subject that you were debating." So several weeks later, I received a letter from him and a packet of information from the Congressional Research Service. And with that letter, whenever I was in a situation where the debate wasn't going very well, I'd pull the letter out and read it. It was to Bill from Senator Humphrey, and I didn't lose a debate after that. So that taught me that being a good leader and having influence, um, and respect from other people, uh, really pays off in dividends, and that was an interesting lesson to learn. Later on, I served in the United States Army in Vietnam, and that clearly showed the importance of being leader and courageous in a wartime situation. Um, uh, I got involved while I was over there as well in some of the humanitarian efforts that we provided to the Vietnamese people in providing food and clothing and school supplies to the children. So I heard of a friend. I had a friend that worked down at Saigon at the port there, and he said there was a ship coming in from the American Friends Service Committee, and it was filled with refugee supplies. So I went to my commander, and there was supposed to be an officer that was in charge of what we call the Hearts and Minds program, and he refused to do it. So I asked the commander if I could take that role as a sergeant, and he said sure. So I went and explained what was going on down at Saigon, and I got a letter from him authorizing me to go down and pick up the supplies from the USAID office, uh, with the United States Department of um, Aid, to International Aid. And so I went down there and took three big trucks down there, and
Mm.
went to this guy's office, and Mr. Bomar was his name. And I had the letter, and I went and I said, I understand what your warehouse is here. You have these supplies, and I'd like to fill some of these up and take them up to a village that we're supporting up north. And he literally laughed at me and said, "We've already turned those supplies over to the Vietnamese government to administer, and they're handing it." And then he kind of winked at me, which told me that they ended up in the black market. So he threw me out of the office. So I took my team downstairs, and right across the street from the USAID office, which was one of the largest buildings in Saigon, was a little shack that had the word CARE on it, the UN care agency. So I went in and talked to the young American uh, guy that was running it and told him what was going on. And he told his helper. He said, "When take these guys over to the warehouse and fill up their trucks." So we went to the warehouse and care, which is an international agency, uh, and by the UN, and picked up all the supplies that we needed and brought them up to the village. And literally, in the next couple of weeks, we went out to the village and distributed the clothes to
Wow.
a lot of the kids who were literally naked, and the
Mm.
food and school supplies. And um, that taught me a huge lesson about being innovative in when you approach problems, and don't let a no get involved with your with your goal.
Yeah, that's that's an amazing story. Um, Something that popped into my head, which I'd love to ask you about, as a pilot. What have you learned from being a pilot that applies to leadership?
Well, it's a very important question because when you're a pilot, you're required to maintain a you have a book of aviation. It's called the Airman's Information Manual, and it's about 400 pages long, and it covers every possible action that you would take to fulfill the rules of the Federal Aviation Administration. And you have to know those pretty well when you're flying because you're a threat not only to yourself if you're not a competent pilot, but also to others. So I learned from that there are procedures that you have to follow, and you have to maintain them if you want to be a good pilot. And I had got enough hours to become a commercial pilot and was able to fly in northern Minnesota a lot of float plane with a lot of fishermen up into Canadian waters for them to 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 fish. So I learned from that you had to follow the rules, you had to keep good communication skills, and you had to adhere to a plethora of responsibilities in terms of operating the aircraft safely, communicating with the, the controllers, and making sure that your passengers are safe, and being a good, competent pilot to ensure that the flights are safely operated.
Yeah, that's something I've always been fascinated by the checklists of pilots because I read a book. I can't remember what it's called. It's pretty recent, but it's about the importance of checklists in leadership. And one of the points they make is about the checklists that pilots use and also surgeons, and basically when it's literally life or death, how much checklists. So this might be a silly question, but how I always wonder because leadership, one of the challenges is you can have great policies, but how do you implement them and hold people accountable? What How does the airline aviation authority hold pilots accountable? How have they managed to keep the standards, and how do they keep the standards so high to make sure people are following through with what they need to do?
Well, there are two elements to that. The first element is that you're, the early training that you have as a pilot has to be, it's very proceduralized and has to be very intense. As you suggest, a checklist is absolutely essential. I use it every time I get in an airplane because if you miss a procedure, overlook a procedure, you put the whole flight of safety. And accidents occur when one or two elements of that flight is either neglected or ignored, um, which kind of goes into a kind of a death spiral of failures that end up in an accident. I spent time. I was hired by United Airlines. Spent some time as United Airlines as a marketeer, not as a pilot, but we developed training systems for the Air Force, and we were the first airlines to set up a training program. And that program was to train pilots for the at that time the largest military aircraft in the U.S. Arsenal, the C-5A aircraft, the Galaxy, and um, we set up a training program that emphasized all that, and it was the first time a computer-based program was developed with several iterative training devices until you got into a simulator the way the airlines do it, and you have all those procedures down, and you do your check ride in the simulator, and the first time you get in the airplane is the Air Force sign off that you're a competent pilot. So it's the instilling these actions and reactions to those procedures that help maintain the safe operation of the aircraft.
Yeah, no, thank you for explaining that, and that's amazing to hear that you were actually able to be part of some of that development. I think around some of the training. That's incredible. Um, so I'm interested to know, Bill, as you reflect on your career so far, you've done many and varied things, not just in the current role you're in. So I want to ask you about any aha moments. You know, those moments where, whether it was 2 years ago or 20 years ago, they're ingrained in your memory because whether something went better than expected or really worse than expected, there's something that happened, a story where it really taught you a lesson about leadership that you'll never forget and was very formative. Are there any aha moments that come to mind for you?
Yes, I can think of one specifically. As I mentioned earlier, my relationship with Senator Hubert Humphrey was a cyclical one. When I was an aide to Senator Gary Hart, who was one of my mentors in leadership. I worked on his campaign and served as a staffer both in Washington. And one of the tasks I had, because of my background in the military, I did a lot of work for the Armed Services Committee for maintaining, emphasizing training, and also for veterans in their focusing on employment, and also had written some legislation that really changed the entire adjudicative process of the VA to provide court review of the decisions to determine the eligibility of service-connected disabilities for veterans. And one day I was on the floor with my boss, Gary Hart, who was a young 34-year-old senator from Colorado, and eventually became a presidential candidate. But he was reading an amendment that I had written to the Jimmy Carter, President Jimmy Carter's uh, public uh, public construction bill. As you recall, that was during a very recessionary time, and this was to provide federal funds to states and federal agencies to increase their construction of government buildings, and it was a multi-billion dollar bill. And one of the things that was lacking in the bill that I determined was the fact that because of the high unemployment rate amongst Vietnam veterans, they were not given opportunities to get some of those jobs. So we wrote an amendment that would require special consideration for veterans, particularly disabled veterans, to get a little leg up in these millions of jobs that would be made available. Well, as the senator was reading his statement, nervously reading his statement, Hubert Humphrey, who at that time had come back as a senator after his stint as vice president, and of course was dying of cancer. He walked on the floor. He had his little IV bottle with him, and he was very, very sick. And he got on the floor of the Senate, and he heard two things from the senator: jobs and veterans. So he went to his desk and asked the president of the Senate, can would the young senator from Colorado relinquish some time for this for Senator Humphrey to speak? And of course, Gary said absolutely. And so he got the microphone, and a senator is normally given 3 minutes to speak, and Gary had spoken for about 2 minutes, so he would give up a minute to the senator from Minnesota, former vice president, and he of course went on for 20 minutes espousing the concept of what the young senator from Colorado was presenting, and um, it at the end of it he called for unanimous consent, which is a procedure by which the amendment is voted on right away, as long as the leadership of both parties agree, and it passed. My point being is that um, that um, he underwent a tremendous amount of change from his pro-war period when I had first addressed him after I'd gotten back from Vietnam in Minnesota to a supportive position of taking care of those who fought. So that taught me the lesson of being tenacious on issues, but also to have the ability to change your mind if the situations warrant it. And that was a
Mm.
really important lesson for me to learn in leadership.
Yeah, what a wonderful story. Thank you so much for sharing that, Bill. Um, that's a great aha moment, and actually, I feel like maybe what we can do is invite you back for another episode down the track, because I feel like there's probably about 50 more stories you could share. But I have a bunch of Leadership Express questions that I want to ask you now, which I always enjoy because it
Sure.
brings out some really interesting answers. So, are you ready?
Absolutely.
So, the first question is, what's a book that you've gifted to other people?
Well, it's an older book, but to me it was the one that really encapsulated our foreign policy failures during the Vietnam War. And the book is called A Bright Shining Lie by Neil Sheehan, who was a reporter during the Vietnam War. In fact, one of the individual New York Times reporters that uncovered the My Lai massacre, which was a very crucial uh, point in changing the political landscape in the United States toward the war. He tells the story of a fellow by the name of John Van, who was an infantry leader who spent a tremendous amount of time in the Vietnam War, not only as active army person, but eventually going into the CIA and USAID as a leader to develop policy for the war. And it tells a story of his gung ho aspect of it initially, and then how he was able to change his opinion about the uh, the failed policies of the war, and became a positive influence in changing U.S. policy. Unfortunately, he was killed while he was a civilian in a helicopter accident in Vietnam. But it's a very insightful presentation of how policy can
Hmm.
change, how people can change their minds uh, when confronted with more accurate facts about a situation or a decision.
Yeah, that's a great recommendation. Thank you for sharing that. I'm really interested to check that out. Actually, it sounds like a great read, um, a really insightful read. So, next question: what is a recent leadership lesson that you've learned for the first time or been reminded of?
Um, I think uh, this relates to listening to people. Um, we tend to be in our lives having a certain mindset about things. Well, one thing that I learned recently is listening to elders, listening to older people who who have wealth of wisdom. Um, One of the more recent incident was an older gentleman who was a survivor of the Iwo Jima uh, battle during World War II, and he had the um, served the blunt of the attack and had to clean up the mess after the island was secured, uh, dealing with taking care of the wounded and soldiers and burying those that had been killed. And he um, would talk about that, but he would say that he didn't allow that incident, that war, to influence him to a point where it became a burden. He became a successful um, uh, engineer in the oil industry, became very successful there, and was able to overcome a lot of the adversity of one of the most tragic battles in the Pacific during World War II. And that was very insightful, in that it showed me that that whole issue of maintaining your compassion about life, in spite of what um, what what happens to you throughout your life, in those moments that have had a significant psychologically and physiologically impact on your life, that a lot of people would just take, and and it would become a burden rather than a blessing, in the
Mm,
sense that you're able to learn from those experiences. So I thought that was pretty important to
yeah.
understand.
No, absolutely. Yeah, that's a wonderful story, but also I think it's really challenging to do that. So I understand why you admired um, hearing that. Um, Next question for you. Do you have any favorite questions you like to ask, Bill, where you're sitting one on one with someone, or you're with a team, or you're sitting with a stakeholder from the community? Are there any favorite questions that you like to ask?
Well, I think you touched on it earlier, um, and the lesson that or I like to elicit from people is, uh, how do you reach a conclusion on your position, and what was the foundation of the discussions and conclusions, and then what's relevant to making you change your mind. I mean, I think society today, we're in such a we put blinders on, and they're so thick that you're not able to look left or right. And I think it's important to understand that, we all don't have the the complete and full answer. That we have to listen, and we have to um, uh, get people to think through um, how they came to a conclusion on an issue, and then what influenced them to change their mind. Because we all have to change our mind at some point. And I think it's important, because we can't go forward without compromise.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree. Um, so, next question for you: what's a great piece of advice you've received in leadership, in life, where someone gave you a piece of advice that's really stuck with you, Bill?
Well, I think what I worked for a congressman. His name is Ed Perlmutter, and he's decided, after, I think, 4 or 5 terms in the House of Representatives, that he's going to retire. And he works very hard. But what he told me, and he gave me a list of rules to follow when I initially took this job, which was my first elected position. Um, and that was, never assume. Um, and I think that's a very important lesson for all of us to take heart with, because making assumptions prematurely, um, or based upon whatever mechanism one uses to achieve achieve a decision, there's always room to move to the left or right of that decision, depending upon circumstances that change. Well, after that decision or that assumption is made.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice. Um, what about any tips, Bill, about how to find and keep great talent?
Well, I think it's a unique process that I use, and that is number one, you're looking at the qualifications initially because that titillates you a little bit to here's someone that may be helpful. Uh, but what I learned in terms of getting good people is it's not necessarily what they have on paper, what degrees they have, or what kind of grades they got in school. It's uh, finding people that have the ability to have to be critical thinkers, to be able to weigh appropriately their their intellectual process of thinking, um, and and then to be as a leader, be supportive of that. Allow people to expand their horizons. Allow them to ask appropriate questions and not be tied to a specific ideology or systemic procedure. Because innovation does not occur when we all
Mm,
put blinders on and walk down the assumption goal. I do
yeah.
a lot of work with aerospace firms in the county, and large corporations have that tendency that they don't look beyond the department that they're working with. They put blinders on and they don't listen to anybody on the left or right, and that's a huge mistake because that's where innovation occurs when somebody comes up with a different approach or different ideas. And I try to
Mm,
instill in my staff to have that maintain that ability and
yeah.
not do it either by an assumption or be tied to a specific methodology of finding ways to innovate.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, what about any movies or TV shows? This doesn't have to be serious, but it can be something really profound, or it can be something lighthearted that you just love, as to switch off to as a movie or a TV show. Do you have any favorites that have had an influence on you?
Well, one of my favorites is an old movie called Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and that kind of addresses some of the things that I've been talking about. That you have to be tenacious if you believe in something strongly, and I think that reflects the old um, B-25 pilot who was an actor, then turned pilot, and then came back to acting. Uh,
Mm,
I think he exemplified not only in his personal life uh, the importance of public service, but in terms of how he selected the kinds of films that he went after. Uh, uh,
yeah, yeah. That's a great recommendation. I'll have to check that out. I haven't actually seen that. Last question, Bill. This has been so much fun getting to hear some of your stories and great wisdom. Um, if you could only give one piece of leadership advice to a young leader, what would you say?
I would say be patient and tenacious. Uh, I
Mm,
think those are the two things that I think exemplifies good leadership. And you go back to some of the great leaders in World War
mm,
II and throughout our history.
yeah.
Um, Sometimes you have to wait um,
Mm,
for the appropriate time to take action, and I think that's important. And I think those that that adhere to those kinds of tenets um, will find significant rewards in the end.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Bill. Well, for those who've just really enjoyed hearing some of your stories and understanding how you lead, and maybe they're interested in finding out more about Arapahoe County, where can people find out about the county online, Bill?
You can go to uh, Arapahoe County gov.com. And my personal website is Holen at Arapahoe County, and I'll spell it ARAPAHOEGOV.com. Or they
Wonderful.
can just go on the website is just Arapahoe County, Colorado.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank our listeners for tuning in. This has been a real joy. I've really enjoyed this episode. And for our listeners, don't forget, I also have the Jonno White Leadership Podcast and the Leadership Question of the Day podcast. Two other places you can go to invest in your leadership. But I want to finish today by saying a massive thank you to Bill for being so generous with your time, for sharing incredible stories from your life and leadership that pretty mind blowing actually, in terms of the different spheres and people that have come up, and the opportunities you've had and the lessons you've learned, which are so appropriate for 2022, which is what I love. So thank you so much, Bill. I've just had a great time. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Well, thank you very much, Jonno, and give my best to your staff. You've got a great staff, and I've got with Luke and our staff. He does great work in helping me prepare for these interviews, and I really admire your mission and your thoughtfulness and your tenacious approach to life. Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast as much as I did. If you're joining us for the first time, don't forget to check out consultclarity.org. That's our website, consultclarity.org. We have so many free resources on there, including our 7 Questions on Leadership series. We've had more than 1,500 leaders from all over the world in all different roles, in different industries, answer these 7 questions on leadership, and leaders give these in-depth answers around how they spend their time, a book that's been significant for them. It's just a gold mine. It's completely free to access, so go to consultclarity.org and look for that. We'd also love to interview you about your leadership. I believe your experience, your life, your context means that you have advice on leadership that other leaders can learn from. Yes, you. If you're going, not me, well, no, I really believe you would have something to add. So if you're looking for a way to give back, it's completely free to get involved. And we would love to interview you through the 7 Questions on Leadership. You just go to consultclarity.org/7-questions-interest, or Google consultclarity.org 7 questions interest and fill out the form and get involved. We have a free resource on our website called the Leadership Survival Guide. It's a 57-page ebook, 10 world-class leaders giving their thoughts on leadership, and that's completely free. It's available on our homepage, consultclarity.org, right at the top, so make sure you go and get that and download it today. And we have a free daily email that you can subscribe to. We send this out to over 15,000 leaders from around the world. And it contains the highlights of content from our podcasts, our blogs, our books we're reading. It's got the best content, and it gives you exclusive, limited, early access to our masterclasses, workshops, new products, special offers. It's all for our subscribers. You can go to consultclarity.org/subscribe and join 15,000 other leaders. And you know, my gift to you is to work really hard, particularly through the Leadership Conversations podcast. I have been blown away by the quality of the leaders, and I'm learning as much as anyone in doing these interviews. So I'm having a great time. And my gift to you is to keep lining up the best leaders I can to invest in your leadership. Your gift to me, if you're finding this helpful, there is something that you could do that would help us out massively. And that is to write a review and to leave a rating for our podcast or wherever you're watching or listening to this. I can't tell you how much that helps us out. Also, subscribe or follow. It really does make a difference in helping us to help more leaders become everything they're meant to be. Another thing that means a lot to me personally is when I see our community share our content. So if you do share this or any other piece of content on social media, then thank you, and please do that. And look for me, Jonno White, or Clarity, and tag us in your post. Our team is always looking for posts to engage with from our community, and there's also a chance that we'll share your content to go beyond and share it with our followers. Last of all, you can check out my book. It's called Step Up or Step Out: How to Deal with Difficult People Even If You Hate Conflict. I wrote this book because 50% of the coaching sessions I have with leaders, this topic comes up again and again and again. And it's this idea of, how do I have this difficult conversation? How do I lead this person better when I'm finding them difficult? Or in some cases, you look and you say, I think I might be leading a difficult person. They're just quite difficult to lead, or I'm finding them quite difficult to lead. So there's a 3-step process that I unpack in Step Up or Step Out. And the amazing thing, and I've literally done this myself, and I've heard it anecdotally from other leaders as I've coached them, is that if you follow this process, you will see that person step up and change their behavior or make a decision, which is to step out some of the time. 95% of the time, people will step up or step out in just 4 weeks. And I stand by that. It's you have to read the book to understand, but I really do believe in it, and I've experienced it firsthand. It works. So you can go to Amazon, look up Step Up or Step Out Jonno White, or store.consultclarity.org/book. Well, thank you so much for listening. We're going to be back with a new episode next time of the Leadership Conversations podcast. And I hope today has helped you to take another step towards becoming the leader you're meant to be. See you next time.